Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Andy and Kat. And today we're actually, something happened on the weekend that I kind of wanted to do. So, Andy and I were sort of discussing this right before we came online. And then we actually thought that this is going to help you. You could very well benefit from this in your career as a consultant, or even not as a consultant, as somebody who is giving advice to somebody else. And I think that this little story can really help you in your travels going forward, I think. Right?
I agree.
I'll set up the stage.
Sure. Sounds
Okay.
good.
All right. So here's what happened. So we obviously have a Facebook page, and I have a team, if you will, that helps me post some items on our Facebook page, and they are often, articles that have to do with personal development and things that will allow you to be a good, like a better you, right? Either if it's soft skills, it could be mindset, it could be like a technical skill, it could be anything. Anyways, personal development, professional development, blah. So one day, this article from Dr. Oz comes on to the feed, and the article title is this: Dr. Oz wants you to realize that your best years are still ahead of you. Right? And so that's pretty positive, and obviously it would be really sad if your best years were behind you, right?
That's right.
So I didn't think anything of it, and this article was posted. And then there was an individual who had commented on our Facebook page saying that, Dr. Oz is a cancer to society, and blah blah blah, this stuff should not be posted. I don't know whether or not he said that. I kind of forgot exactly the message. He was insinuating that Dr. Oz is inappropriate in his advice, or he's giving out wrong advice, and he's not, benefiting society, right? So then we actually ended up, removing that post. And afterwards I thought, like, why is, Dr. Oz he's not all, like, I really don't know what all the things he says in his life, right? There could be some things that, is not beneficial to society. But I think that on the whole, he means well. The intention is a good intention, right?
Mhm.
And so we kind of brought this scenario to, like, how would this apply to our listeners, like the position that we're in. And the fact of the matter is, our listeners, chances are in a position where we are giving advice, right? Whether or not you're actually called a consultant, there's going to be at least some point in your life in which you are called to consult, right? Give advice, essentially.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's kind of what I wanted to discuss, and how we can learn from this situation and apply it to make our lives better, essentially.
Right. Yeah. No, this is good. I think the one thing that I think all consultants need to understand is that we're paid for an opinion, and our opinion does not necessarily mean that our clients will execute our opinion, but we should be coming in and have an opinion on what we believe is the right solution. So, just the basic options and recommendations is a normal thing that most consultants have to do. You should always be giving some sort of recommendation, which is really your opinion on saying, this is what I think is the correct thing to do. Now, I'll just kind of bridge that over to Dr. Oz, and any sort of kind of celebrity who's on TV being asked questions, is that they're asked for an opinion. And sometimes those opinions, and I'm not trying to defend Dr. Oz, but I do know that they're put in positions where sometimes they give an opinion that may or may not be something that they would give later. And I think that's the same thing as a consultant, where, and I think in the situation with that individual who was probably saying Dr. Oz is a cancer to society, it likely was some of the issues that some of the statements that Dr. Oz gave during the pandemic, and the person probably didn't agree with it. And this is where we lose credibility, because if somebody makes a statement that we don't agree with, often they throw out all of the topics that somebody says, and they say, well, they're just useless, and all of the things that they say is garbage. It's important to understand that opinions are opinions, and that it's our job, even when we're reading something or hearing something, is to be able to sift through the wheat from the chaff and figure out what stuff is good and what stuff isn't. And I think we like to kind of have this black and white view of things to say, what everything Tim Ferriss says is good, everything that this person says is bad, and until they don't agree with something Tim Ferriss says or whoever, right? It's like it's all or nothing, right? Rather than trying to figure out, what information do I agree with and what stuff can I use and what stuff can't I?
So that's the thing, right? Like that's where the critique and the critical thinking comes in, and really, and so to bring this back to being in a position of advisory, right? You only have the information that you have at hand, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't feel that you have enough of the information in which to give a good recommendation for the interest of your client, right? And less of you, and hopefully they marry themselves together, right? The onus is on you to gather enough information in order to do so, and right. to weed out. And again, with a either all or nothing, it's not all or nothing. It could be, some from this and some from that, but really you have to piece together that story that makes sense to the situation.
Right. 100%. Yeah. And I think where a lot of consultants get into trouble is what ends up happening is they start to make decisions that are either good for them, the easiest decision. I've seen that a lot of times, and or they don't do the legwork, or if they're working for a company, they're making the decision that's best for the company they're working for, not for the client. And I'll tell you, nobody has ever, in my opinion, nobody ever makes the wrong decision when you're making the decision for your client. So if you can put yourself in that position and say, am I making a recommendation that is 100% with the client in mind? If you can make that at that point in time with all the information you've been given, then you can rest easy. You can sleep easy at night saying, I did what I could for that individual, not I did what I could based on what was easiest or what made me the most money or what made my company the most money or whatever is, there's some other ulterior motive. Now, if the client chooses your recommendation, it's one thing, but really your options and recommendations should always have the client's best interest in mind. Always. That's who's paying the bill. And I think if we put ourselves in that position, right, if you went out to buy a new car or you had some construction work that had to be done in your home, you would be hurt and really lose trust in another individual and probably have the ability to sue someone if you found out later that they made decisions or recommendations based on what was good for them, not what was good for you. So I think it just goes without saying that you should always have your client's best interest in mind. And the reminder is that a lot of consultants don't. So not all, but some don't have that, and they're not thinking about all of the things that can benefit the client.
So let's unpack this, what's good for the client, and how you can actually figure out what's good for the client, because often it's hard to figure out what you feel is good for the client, right? For one thing, our interest lies within ourselves first and foremost, right? And what is going to benefit us, that's a given, right? But the thing is that in order to be a successful person in an advisory capacity, you need to be able to take yourself out of your own head and take on the perspective of the person who is receiving your services, right? And even then, there's like a macro view and a micro view, right? Because it depends on who you're working with, right? What's good for them might not be what's good for the organization. What's good for the organization might not be good for what one particular department. So there's all these different perspectives. How do you figure out what best to do?
Right. Well, the first thing I think, the first thing I do is I'll always say, if I own the company, what would I do? I try to put myself in and say, if this was my company, what decisions would I make? Because then I can literally put myself in their situation and ask myself, what decision would I make? But you're right, Kat. One challenge is that when we look at the organization, we're kind of thinking of the organization as the whole holistic enterprise.
Yeah.
But we've got departments, right? So if you're working for the finance department, they may have a different view than engineering or the IT, right? And so you might end up having where you do have conflicting requirements or conflicting kind of conditions that different departments put on. I think that when you come up with the options, and that's one of the reasons why we come up with options and recommendations, is that the options are to meet those other situations that might be out there. So if you might find out, again, if you go back to the old, time, money, resources, you look at it and say, how much is it going to cost, right? How much time is it going to take to put into place? And do we have the resources to be able to do it? You look back at those things and start saying, okay, with my options, I might have to clearly identify those to say, this is the one that's the most expensive, but it gives you the most features. This is the one that's the most time effective. However, you don't get all the features. And I think that's really why you come up with, with options and recommendations is for those specific things to really clearly identify what you get with each option. No different than kind of buying a car. You go, this is the cheapest one, but you get less safety. And so if safety is your concern, you better, buy something that's more, maybe more expensive, but gives you more safety features.
Right. So you hit on something that is very integral to being a consultant or a person in an advisory capacity, and that is to provide a series of recommendations, right? A series of alternatives. And to the point where I said, well, how do you figure out, what, and maybe it was you who said this, but a finance's perspective might not be engineering's perspective, and the two can conflict. Well, I think that the best way to handle that is to lay out the different alternatives, right? And your job is not to necessarily decide for them. Your job is to lay out the alternatives as best you can, pros and cons, and what's easy, what's beneficial long-term, and then let them figure it out. But in order to let them figure it out, you need a really great cross-section of the people who matter.
100%.
Right? There's a reason why you are not in the leadership capacity and you're in the advisory capacity, right? And the decision relies in the person or the people who represent that organization.
Right. Exactly. And this is one thing I think that consultants really struggle with in general. More or less experienced consultants, I think, really struggle with it is first of all, feeling confident enough to give an opinion, because they sometimes haven't seen enough, or they think, who's going to listen to me anyways? And my thing is, you have to come up with options and recommendations and have an opinion. And, that's one thing. The other one is people being upset because their recommendation isn't selected. And I'll be honest, that has been a big thing for me, right? I give a recommendation, they say no, and they do something else. And I'm like sulking because why didn't they take my recommendation? What was wrong with it? Why, what aren't they seeing? And it took me many, many years to get past that. And there's still that little bit of dig when your recommendation isn't selected. I'll be honest, right? Because you put a little bit of heart and soul into it, and there's some experience that goes into it, and you think it's the right choice. But you have to support the decision once it's there. Once that decision's made, everybody has to be on board to do the right thing. And I think you alluded to this even around the different factors or the different kind of conflicting kind of requirements. Is we don't have the whole picture. We never have the full picture. Mm-hmm. And we might find out that the CFO, he or she might be under other pressure. And so they may make a selection that looks like it isn't the best solution, but they're picking it based on what they know. And we have to trust that, okay, they, you know, if we properly gave them all of the information and they're wise and they have, they took the time to actually make the proper decision, that there are other factors that are outside of our knowledge that is in play that we just have to go with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I just wanted to mention one thing that you had, I just picked up on something that you had said earlier, and that is your recommendation, your choice, right? And so why did you come up with just the one choice? Isn't the entire thing to have a series of choices for the client? Like, why would you be siding with one or the other?
Well, you should have options, and you should have a recommendation. So you should have a series of options. So if you're, and then you should have a recommendation. So your recommendation should be the one that you would say that this is the one that I would select, right? This is the one that I think is the best, and you should give the reasons why. I think that, status quo is always an option, but status quo is really never an option, right? No one's usually going to not do anything. Having said that, I have seen people say, we're not going to do anything. We're going to leave it as is because, again, there's other factors that are in play where they go, look, we can't take that on. Or we've entertained this to a point where now we have to make a decision, and our decision is to do nothing. And not always the best decision, but again, there are things that are outside of our understanding that we may or may not even fully understand the client is in. So
it's true. I can appreciate that the do nothing alternative could be a viable alternative if there is a future something that is not yet panned out. Mm-hmm. Right? And so the decision is not necessarily to do nothing, absolutely nothing forevermore, but to defer that decision until that whatever future event has come to or closer to fruition or has come into place.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And often what I've seen, what happens is there's something else, like the do nothing isn't really do nothing because there are other wheels already in motion. So you will find that they'll say, well, we're not going to do this project, or we're not going to do anything right now. And then you find out, because the controller was let go, 2 weeks later, and they were bringing in someone in and have a completely fresh eyes on this problem, right? Or they didn't want to have something in progress while somebody new was coming in. So you go, look, there were other factors in place and in play that we didn't know, and they made those decisions. So yeah, you're 100% right, Kat. It wasn't do nothing forever. It was do nothing right now. We'll do something later.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's take up the opposite scenario in which you've presented the alternatives, the pros and the cons. The information is pretty complete. You've made your recommendation. It's a good recommendation. And it really is, in truth, what is best for the organization. But you also have, the stakeholders who come from their various different perspectives, and they select the exact opposite that you select, and is clearly, so very clearly, the wrong choice. Right. What do you do?
Document it. There's the real documentation around, okay, here's the decision that we're going to go with. But I would always document that by yourself. The reason you do that, and I've been in that situation where the client is making a decision that is going to cause a mess later. They have not fully understood the impact, or there are other consultants in the room that are pushing another agenda. Mm-hmm. And what I'll do is I'll just document it, because the reason being is that it isn't to say later, oh, you did this, but it really is to go back and be able to say, these decisions were made. These were the people in the room. Our options were this. I recommended this. The decisions were made by these individuals on this date. Document it. The reason is because consultants are great scapegoats. So, there's a lot of times where later somebody goes, well, that guy didn't do it, or that person, that lady didn't give the right option, or they were the one that screwed it up. You want to make sure that you document it. And this isn't about you being right. It's really about, at that point, you protecting your own credibility, because there's a lot of people that get blamed for bad decisions, and you don't want to be one of them. So my recommendation is to document it up. Once the decision is made, though, I would really avoid having side conversations later to derail the project. So what tends to happen is, I've seen this a lot of times. A decision's made, it's gone through the process, and what'll happen is the consultants that don't like it, or the individuals that don't like the decision that was made, they will do a backdoor job, behind the scenes, behind the curtain. They'll meet with bosses. They'll escalate up the chain. They'll go to the CEO or the CFO, and they'll push their own agenda. You don't want to get in that situation. I would avoid that at all costs, unless we're driving off a cliff. If you know that this is going to be a disaster, like this is going to be, a historic, catastrophe, I would let it go. And the reason being is that you do not want to start losing trust with the people in the room and circumventing the process. I think that I've been on too many projects where things get, just decisions get brought back up, and there's never decisions, because you always have people behind the scenes working these things back up, and using their own political avenues to kick back up decisions that have already been made. So, but again, I think that, if something is going to be catastrophic, the client will, they won't recover. I think of it again, if you know that someone's going to make a decision that's going to literally harm them and harm the organization, then you need to escalate it. If it's going to be something that's going to cause a bunch of rework and it's going to cost them money, you might just have to let them go. But I would document it. I would always document the decisions, who were there, what day was the decision made, what you were recommending, because you want to be able to go back and say, this was what was decided.
So I think that I like what you have recommended. So I see your recommendation, and I raise you in addition to documenting the actual decision made, if you are going to be with that client and on that project and having to, work with the decisions that have been made, there might be an element of thinking how to mitigate risk, how best to cushion the fall, if you will. Right? Because you don't want to be in a position where, like, chances are, if you're going to be out with that client, you're going to probably have to pick up the pieces.
Right.
When do they fall? Right? If that wrong decision was actually made. So I think that creating mitigation, and what does that mean? Like, it depends on the scenario, right? It could be a business process, or it could be a system configuration, right? So let's take it's a scenario where it's a business process. We're going to have this business process that they decided to do that, but it's going to be a vast amount of work for somebody, and this, right? But they can't see it, and they've decided that, this person will just be blah. Well, and then there's no backup. This person has no so anybody else to cover off. And so essentially, if that person leaves the organization, and this, if that person leaves the organization, there's no backup, the whole entire system is going to fail, right? It's going to stop right there, and nothing can move on, right? And so what do? So yeah, document it. But I think that if you need to be able to support that process later on with the client, you better have a secret, I don't know if it's secret or like some secondary auxiliary fallback plan, such that you might keep it in your back pocket, right?
Yeah.
And so here's the thing, if you keep it in your back pocket, you might not ever have to use it, right? But if in the event that person decides, no, I hate you organization, I'm going to leave, and you're screwed, which according to that business process, they really are, because that's the only person who can do that particular step in the process. Then you can come out and say, hey, don't worry, here's what we're going to do. Right. And you've already have a workaround. And let me tell you, if it's not and a lot of consultants actually like to do this, is that they like to swoop in at the very last minute and be the savior.
Yeah. Yeah. We love that.
Right? Right?
Yeah.
They love that.
Mhm.
And yeah, it makes you really, it looks good, right? And it obviously helps the client, right?
Mhm.
And it's something that, you know, if in the event that you need to do this, it's a really great thing to do, right?
Yeah.
For the intent of saving the scenario, creating a workaround, bridging that gap, and then moving forward.
Right.
I caution you though, and maybe you can jump in with this with what you think. I caution you to always do this.
Yeah.
Right. Because as we had mentioned before, consultants love to do this because it makes them look great. It makes them look indispensable, right? Oh, we need this person. She's such a savior. She saves the day every single time. We always go to her. She becomes a go-to person. But that is, I don't want to say that it's annoying, but it's like, it's really hard to work with.
Right.
You know, like you can't be you're not even part of the organization.
Right. Yeah. Right. 100%. Well, and I like that plan around mitigating the risks around that. And because especially if you're making a recommendation and let's say you see where the pitfalls are, you should be able to say, well, if these are the pitfalls, what can we do to deal with those issues when they come up? So I think that's a great piece of advice. And I 100% agree. You know, I think we don't want to be the equivalent of a helicopter parent, you know, or a helicopter consultant that is constantly there with, you know, a pillow every time that the client falls to catch them. I think that we have to let them, you know, work through their own issues and be ready when they need us. But you're 100% right. I think that we've seen it too often where there's consultants who are just, all they're doing is walking around, they're ambulance chasing, just looking for any problem that they can come in and fix. Mm-hmm. And you know, and it's annoying, and it really circumvents again the whole trust within the system.
That's right.
That the organization really needs to operate, because you can't just survive with one person fixing everything. No. or even looking for problems, because then it becomes, you have to start questioning, does that person then do they even enable problems to happen so that they can come in and swoop in and
save them? Exactly.
Yeah.
And it really hinders your career as a consultant. Right? Because you can't actually leave. The whole entire point of being a consultant is so that you can guide this organization to a place where they're self-sustaining, and then you can move on to bigger and better things.
Right. Agreed 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I think that, you know, and I think that getting back to our recommendations is, you know, is understanding that, you know, the recommendation, let's say we gave 6 months ago with the information that we had 6 months ago, may be different today. And we really have to develop the confidence to be able to say, look, I gave the right recommendation and I still hold to that recommendation based on the information I had, or that we had at the time. Now we have new information. I think there's a different recommendation there. Now, we don't operate in a world where we keep adjusting the path everywhere we go. So it isn't sort of, you can't just start throwing things out and say, okay, I recommended that 6 months ago. We're through our implementation, throw it out and re-implement something. But if you're realizing, hey, this may not work, you know, again, we have to speak up and have the confidence to do that. You know, because I think that's really critical. You know, and I look back and I have to remind myself this when I look back at decisions I made or recommendations I made that maybe aren't accurate, is to tell myself, first of all, like we said, it was the best decision I could have made with the information at that point in time that I had. The other thing is I have to remind myself, I don't punish myself for a thought I had when I was 10. Right? When we were 10 years old, we don't look back and go, man, I was really stupid to think of that. I was really stupid to think that there was a Santa Claus, right, at 8. You know, how silly of me, and dwell on that. Because we go, look, I had more information later, right? I was given more information later to come up to with my own conclusion, or somebody told me something different. We need to be able to do the same thing and look back and go, look, yeah, when I was 10 years ago, 6 years ago, 6 months ago, I did the best with what I had, and I can't beat myself up. I have to look and say, why didn't I have more information? Did I not ask the right questions? Was the information even available? Was somebody withholding information from me? So we can learn and improve. And I think that's where, you know, going back to Dr. Oz, our best years are ahead of us. If we keep improving and trying to improve with what we know, as opposed to looking back and go, man, I was really stupid 6 months ago for not knowing that. Well, if you did your best, you did your best. You know, learn from it and try to be better today. That's all we can do.
And so I feel like the project methodology, and it just doesn't apply to each and every project, right? But the agile project methodology really incorporates this, as opposed to the waterfall type project methodology, right? So the agile methodology, you know, you go into a series of sprints for a series of features, and then you develop it, and then you demo it. And then you demo it in front of the decision makers, right, and the stakeholders and the product owners. And then you gather their feedback as to make sure that you're still on course, or now that you have that added information, does something need to change? And we've done this, like in projects that I've been on, we've gone through perhaps some demos and where some key decisions were made. A piece of development was done. We demoed it, and then the business was like, "Oh, you know what? I didn't actually think about this particular, you know, point of view." And so we had to revisit perhaps a business decision, or perhaps create an additional feature to add to the sprint, right? But that's a whole entire point of having the agile, iterative project methodology in which to develop something. Now, obviously, not every project can entertain an agile project methodology, right? So like an agile project means that you should be able to go to production with something usable after every sprint. Well, in a large scale ERP implementation, you might not be able to do that. Like, what are you going to do? Like create an AP invoice and that's it? Like it doesn't make sense, right? Where's that money going to go? So, so that's, I mean, with a lot of our large scale ERPs, and maybe you can, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've seen is that they're usually waterfall type projects, like major financial systems. But really, you might be able to entertain some elements of agile within that, you know, within that area. Perhaps you can create a scenario in a test system and plan it out and just like demo it to your business decision makers to say, hey, this is actually what it's going to look like. But, you know, imagine, if you will, that there's this field that is obviously not here yet. This is, you know, pick this field and then blah, blah, blah. And then they might be like, oh yeah, no, this is exactly what I need. Or they might be like, no, absolutely the opposite of what we were thinking.
Yeah.
And then you kind of have a better idea, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I like the concept, and I you know, where we do a lessons learned. And I think
very much so,
you know, where we do, you know, periodically throughout the project, and you got the stage gates or milestone type of reviews that go on a long running project, where at some point you say, okay, do we continue the project? And 99.9% of the time you carry on, even if you're behind and the functionality is not working, you keep going. But normally what happens is that the lessons learned is only done at the end of a project. And we already know, like if you do any kind of manufacturing type of work, if anybody's studying any sort of process manufacturing, you know that the QA reviews are done throughout the process.
Correct.
And that you do that because, of course, you don't want to come to the end of the line. The traditional way that they used to manufacture, the car would roll off the end of the line and go, oh, wow, man, look at all the mistakes. And then they fix all the mistakes. You do it throughout the process. And I think that lessons learned, which I think we can put in place even in our personal lives, is to say, right now, what have I learned for this year? What have I done well? What have I not done well? What changes can I make? And I think that's really important to do that, because you may as well keep doing more of the stuff that works and change the stuff that doesn't work, and at least give it a shot and see if you can improve, rather than just say at the end of the year, when I do my goal setting, what did I do well? What didn't I do well? Well, it's kind of too late. I mean,
Yeah.
It's not too late for the next year, but there's no point unless you're going to make those changes.
You can't course correct.
No, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
You're done.
Right.
You're at the end of the
That's
course.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And I think that's what Agile really does well, is that you break those things into smaller sprints, and then say,
and
okay,
retrospectives.
That's right. Yeah. And then what can we accomplish, and what are we doing well? What do we have to change? And yeah.
That's probably one of my favorite pieces of Agile is the retrospective part. So like at the end of every sprint, you get together as a team. And the thing is that not only do you benefit, not only does the product benefit, right? What did we do well? What could have worked better? What actions are we going to commit to make things work better in the next sprint, right? And they have to be sort of practical, right? So you can't pick like 50 things, because you're not going to action all 50 things. You pick 3 to 5, right? But I love that in that it actually builds trust in your team as well.
Yeah.
When you can sit around the table and say, what went well, that's easy because you're giving compliments, you're making everybody look good. That's cool. But what really builds the team, you guys, is when you talk about when you get into that vulnerable place and say, this didn't work well. Mm-hmm. And what could we have done better?
Right.
That takes a lot of courage, for one thing, to first of all admit that perhaps you or somebody else was wrong, right? It's probably even harder to say that, somebody else was wrong. Mm-hmm. Right. And so obviously, there's ways to phrase this such that you are wrong collectively. Yeah. Yeah. And that you can now move forward by doing this, and this, right? So you keep it very clinical. But really, you guys, if you're able to do this consistently at the end of, every 2 weeks or every month, even, or every 2 months, even every quarter, that allows you to course correct both the product that you're trying to deliver, and it builds you guys into a stronger, more trusting team.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah. 100%. I think that's critical is to do those reviews and figure out what's working, what isn't. And I think that, and for people, like you said, for people to be vulnerable, and you tend to get that a lot with people, like, I've coached a lot of hockey, and it's funny because when at the end of a game, if you start to say, especially a game that, let's say, was a really bad loss, you get if you say, okay, who could have played better today? Usually what happens is you get the hands go up with the players that have put in the most effort, and the hands go up with your poorest players, like the players that are not your best players, but they're trying hard. And because what I find is that the players that are not very good, but they're trying really hard, they don't have a judge. Like they go, I can do better. I can do better. I can do better. They can't do any better. They're doing all they can with the skill level they've got. Right. But they're hard on themselves. And usually your best players are hard on themselves. It's the players that really need to improve that never put their hands up. And I think that's where, when people are working on a team, it's really it's really like, and if you have, let's say, like in the consulting world, often you're going to have your less experienced people who go, no, I can learn, I did this wrong. I did this wrong. Well, of course you did, because you're inexperienced, right? That goes without saying. You don't even, and yes, you volunteering this is great. And your really good people are the ones that usually are the ones that are going to be vulnerable. So it's kind of like, but the your really strong people are that show that they're vulnerable. Hopefully bring those ones that need more introspective insight forward. Mm-hmm. And so I think that process is important. The reason I'm saying that process is important is because those people who need more insight need to see your A team showing, hey, you know what, I made a mistake here, or I could have done this better, I could have communicated better, and to bring those people up. And that's really where you get that improvement on a team, because otherwise what happens is, if you're just dealing with the problems and not having that kind of review, people just go, well, you know what, I did all I could, I'm still better than the newbie, so hey, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. And really, you want to get everybody kind of swimming in the same direction and improving.
That's right. Absolutely. Okay, so we talked about a lot.
Yeah.
All because of Dr. Oz.
I know that guy.
That guy.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
How can we wrap up in 3 tidy action steps?
Yeah. I think a few things. One, I think, is understanding that even the how we started off with Dr. Oz, that fell under credibility, and how Dr. Oz ended up losing credibility with that one individual that made those comments from something. Something caused that individual who made those comments on the post to not like Dr. Oz. I think it's important for first of all for us to know, hey, put some thought into what you're saying before you say it. But I'm going to be the first to admit I'm a verbal communicator. So what I do is I many times throw out ideas with not as much thought, because it's something that I'm thinking about right now. So understand, hey, you know what, your credibility is based on what you say and what you do, but give yourself permission also to understand that you don't have all the answers, and neither does anyone else. So we don't have to give everybody a pass and say, hey, people can say whatever they want, but understand, look, people are going to say things, and sometimes it's not going to be 100% accurate. Filter through the stuff that makes sense, and let the other stuff go. We don't need to beat everybody up. And I think right now we're at a time where people are just overly sensitive with what everything's being said. And I think some stuff needs to be held. People need to be held accountable for what they say, for sure, because it is hurtful. But if stuff is just, hey, I question the reason why the person's saying that, maybe get into their space and maybe just give them a pass and maybe let it go. We don't need to beat everybody up for every single thing that's said. I think that's one thing that, for myself, and
I'd like to throw in the retrospective piece, because I think it's highly beneficial to, if you can put this in if you're not doing this already, I think it would be highly beneficial if you can start to try it out on your teams and within your own personal life as well, right? We often, and it might actually even be easier to do on your team than it is to do in your personal life, because if there's one thing I know about myself, is I'm willing to tolerate a standard that I am not willing to tolerate from other people.
Yeah.
Right? So, but the thing about the retrospective, it is very simple. What went well, and it doesn't have to take hours. It's not a whole entire afternoon. It's like an hour or 20 minutes. Just, quick. What went well? What didn't go well in the last 2 weeks, right? Not from the beginning of time, not from when you started in the company. And then what are just three action items that you can commit to, that you're actually going to put pen to paper, put fingers to keyboard, put feet to ground, and actually do, right, within the next 2 weeks. That's all it is. And if you can commit to doing this iteratively, every 2 weeks, month, whatever have you, I promise you will see your teams come together. You will see your life come together like you've never seen before.
I love it.
Cool. All right. So that's the second one. What's the third one?
I think the third one for me is for consultants is to have an opinion. When I say have an opinion, it means, when as consultants, we need to have recommendations. We need to be able to give a recommendation. And I've seen even experienced consultants who avoid giving recommendations. They want to make sure that they're playing the political game. They want to make sure that they're
never
they're
wrong.
not offending anyone. They're never
Yes.
wrong. So they wait to see where the room is leaning, and then they jump in and they'll go with that. And to me, as a consultant, it's really important to do your homework, understand what the client is asking for, give options and recommendations, and then don't be personally, held to it. Again, it's just a thought. It's just a recommendation. It's what you believe is the right choice. Move on, right? And if the client doesn't choose it, learn to move on. It was a lesson I had to learn, and something that I had to kind of get over. And I really recommend people to not take it too personally when a client doesn't choose your recommendation. But I do believe it's really important to make a recommendation. I think that without even going through that process of making recommendations, you don't get better at it. I think it's like investing in the stock market after the fact. When you see the stocks go up and go, I would have picked that one. I would have picked that one. I wouldn't have bought that one. No, until you're actually in the game and until you're actually doing it, you don't realize, how much work goes into making the right choice and making the right recommendation or giving the right options. So do it, because the more you do it, the better you'll get at it.
Cool.